Welcome to the module on political aspects of full employment. This basically goes back to the dynamics of the full employment as perceived by one of the most important contemporary of Keynes called the Michael Kalecki. So Kalecki was one of the first authors to explore these dynamics in the year 1943 in his celebrated essay paper Political Aspects of Full Employment. By this full employment, it is meant that it is not desirable for a capitalistic economy, but Keynes has actually ensured that full employment would be the optimum outcome of any economy in the long run. So this goes back to the insights of the new Keynesian economics, which was just beginning to penetrate in the Western political discussion, and at that particular juncture, Michael Kalecki said that sustaining full employment would require to overcome some of the political obstacles which the capitalist might oppose. And this goes back to the Keynesian economics, which is followed by the Marxian philosophy, and thereby the Kalecki's approach comes in place. As far as the backdrop of the Kalecki's approach is concerned, it is said that it was dubious about the ability of governments in capitalistic economies to use macroeconomic policy to create full employment. This implies that any kind of macroeconomic policies was desperate to ensure full employment in the long run of the output level. However, Kalecki says that the government's ability might be underestimated in this case, and thereby the government should not be desperate to ensure this output or this outcome, particularly in the long run. So Kalecki's concerns arise not only from economic limitations, but from the fundamental political constraints. So these were the different kind of political constraints or obstacles which Kalecki wants to infer or wants to focus on, which makes the attainment of full employment may be desirable from economic philosophy as perceived by Keynes, but it's not so simplistic from a political dimension. And that is what Kalecki wants to oppose the attainment of this kind of outcome. Moreover, it is said that the political constraints suggest that the underlying assumptions of capitalism are unchanged, full employment cannot be maintained. That means the underlying assumptions of capitalism makes the two categories to evolve. One is the working class and one is the capitalist owners. So as long as these two categories evolve, the attainment of full employment might not be the desirable outcome. And that is what Kalecki wants to oppose this attainment as the full equilibrium or the optimum solution. So what we can mention in this particular backdrop is that Kalecki drew an important distinction between achieving and maintaining full employment in a capitalistic economy. So for any sort of economy, full employment may be desirable from economic rationale, but from the nature of the system, whether it is socialistic or capitalistic, attainment of full employment matters. And that is what Kalecki wants to bring into focus, that for a capitalistic economy, it is not so simplistic to go for this kind of notion where full employment can be only the desirable outcome. When we go for the Kalecki's perspective in terms of full employment, then according to Kalecki, full employment is delivered by the Keynesian policy would eventually lead to a more assertive working class. Because this working class actually considered to be at the mercy of the capitalist owners, where they are basically powerless and they are at the mercy of employment of the capitalist. So whenever full employment becomes a perceived notion across all the stakeholders of the society, they can become more firm and they will be aware about their rights, which make them to go for a bargaining power, and hence they will become more assertive. So weakening of the social position of business leaders, causing the elite to react to the erosion of their political power and force a displacement of that policy despite profits being higher than under a laissez-faire system. So these were some of the threats where Kalecki has actually focused on or highlighted on that how a capitalist system will be boiling down or how the capitalist system will erode over time if full employment comes as a desirable outcome. The reflections of erosion are basically the weakening of the social position of the business leaders. Because business leaders used to enjoy political patronage, used to enjoy some discretionary power over the working class. So with the rise in the autonomy or with the rise in the decisive making power of the working class, their capitalist owners' stake can be considered to be at the forgive level, or they can be actually eroding their social position. Moreover, the elite will react to the erosion of political power just as if a monopoly power breaks down and a competitive model comes in. And in a similar manner, displacement will occur of the capitalist owners by the working class. So as a result of all these consequences, profits may be generated within a capitalistic economy, but that will be under a market-oriented economy, but that is from the economic philosophy. But the political dimension says that it will actually take up some hindrances for a capitalist economy to function. If full employment becomes a notion for the working class, or it becomes one of the desirable outcome. Moreover, Kalecki felt that the understanding provided by the Keynesian ideas would be technically feasible by the manipulation of aggregate demand by governments to ensure full employment. So Kalecki has actually uttered on the word of manipulation, which means that Keynes can manipulate the policies, either it's fiscal policy or any kind of policy which will be required to ensure full employment in the long run, and by doing so, it can be technically feasible, but politically it will end up with a huge level of constraints and obstacles. So thereby Kalecki is not in the view of full employment desirable outcome by movements of aggregate demand, which can be done at the wish of the Keynesian economics. Moreover, Kalecki considered that there would be some obstacles to overcome if full employment were to be maintained, so crucial reforms would be needed. So Kalecki also wanted to give a balance to these views that full employment can be attainable, but there should be some crucial reforms to take care of the capitalistic society such that the capitalistic society does not break down. And also some skepticism about the political possibility of maintaining full employment also comes in. That means Kalecki is quite apprehensive that how this political stability can be maintained, and sometimes it is incompatible with the institutions of capitalism. And this is the major finding that Kalecki wants to come up. The major finding which Kalecki wants to focus all the time that capitalism and full employment do not go together. There is always a kind of a tussle or a trade-off between these two important phenomena, where full employment ensures that all the working class and capitalist workers are treated at par, but capitalism actually creates a class struggle and thereby makes the discrimination or disparity to be more and more pronounced. Moreover, Kalecki is also skeptical about the prospects of maintaining full employment in the capitalist economies without fundamental change that would alleviate certain political constraints. That means even if the full employment is reached, but how can full employment will be sustainable? How can full employment will be stable? There are some kind of apprehensions regarding this issue. So moreover, Kalecki is opposing the full employment in a society which is basically driven by the capitalist classes. Moreover, the political possibilities of full employment are also taken up. Whenever we are referring to the political possibilities of full employment, we refer to the economic policies which are undertaken. And any economic policy has to be criticized, or a critical evaluation has to be done from a political dimension. Firstly, we look for the fiscal stimulus. As we know by the word fiscal stimulus, it refers to any kind of reforms in the arena of government tax and government expenditures related to the budget of the nation. So fiscal stimulus, when established by the government, is a short-term tool application which can improve the output and employment only temporarily. That means in terms of Kalecki's approach, any kind of fiscal measure is a temporary effect to accelerate the output only in the short run, and thereby the short-term disturbances can be corrected. However, maintaining full employment would require infinite government injections to the aggregate demand, which may lead to the increase in the level of public debt. Because in most of the third world economies, it has been observed that any kind of expansionary fiscal policy have resulted to reckless public expenditures. And this reckless public expenditures increases the government's obligations on the debt, resulting to unsustainable fiscal deficit, and thereby the government debt has been on the rise. So this has already been done even if full employment was considered to be one of the targeted output. So, targeting full employment may not necessarily reduce the government's burden, but in most of the cases, it has aggravated government's burden according to the economic foundations or the economic rationalities. So, Kaleki wants to point out that full employment may be desirable, but it has some side effects or some drawbacks as far as the supply side and the demand side effects are concerned. Moreover, it is said that in order to keep the debt level in check, what are the political possibilities that can arise? So, firstly, there exists a possibility to keep the debt level in check, but it depends upon the relationship between interest and economic growth rate. So, even if full employment is attained, even if full employment output is accepted, but it can result to the rise in the debts, as most of the times government wants to go for a reckless public spending, and as a consequence interest rate and economic growth rate always has a trade-off, because with the rise in the interest rate, because of the rise in the public borrowings, the cost of borrowing is on the rise, and for investors this is highly discouraging. So, high level of interest rate or cost of borrowing discourages the private investors, crowding out effect takes place, and thereby the growth rate can be retarded. So, this kind of sluggish growth rate associated with the higher level of interest rate resulting from the adoption of expansionary fiscal policy can make the debt levels to be ever rising. So, full employment may be targeted, but the management of interest rate, the regulation of the output, and other fiscal stimulus variables have to be corrected. Secondly, Kaleki further argues that achieving full employment via fiscal stimulus is not difficult, because it is an economic phenomena and any kind of policy mix can result to full employment output. But actually making it sustainable or maintaining it in the long run not only depends as a severe challenge, because it does not depend solely on the government. The most important point is this, that government can only act as a catalytic role, but the political obstacles, the political repercussions also make it very clear whether full employment can be sustainable in the long run or not. So it is actually a myopic vision of the government to go for a short-term analysis of full employment, but not in a long-term sustaining manner. So the inability to keep the full employment at its peak level can be the result of the capitalist institutions. Because within a capitalistic economy, it is highly challenging for making the full employment to sustain for the long run given its drawbacks. So only institutional change of capitalism combined with the macroeconomic policy can affect the actual level of employment so that economy experiences a full employment persistently in the long run. So what is important more than economics is the institutional reforms. And these institutional reforms take care of the political dynamics a state goes through, either through governance, either to political stability or to democracy. Because all these are very much relevant to make the full employment consistent along with the economic rationalities. So the most important summary of the political possibilities is that Keynesian philosophy will be embarking on full employment to come up in the long run with economic policies, but Kalekis is opposing this because only economics or only government cannot do that. It has a lot of political repercussions which is highly challenging in a capitalistic society. So in a capitalistic society, both institutional change and economic policies must go together. So this basically gets into Kaleki's view on full employment. Because the drawbacks of maintaining full employment has been identified by Kaleki, which has been propounded by Keynes, and now he gives an opinion on full employment. How does it look like? So full employment is basically not clear that it is absence of unemployment and everybody will get the jobs. So Kaleki's argument raises a basic question that full employment is actually absence of involuntary unemployment. That means everybody is getting the jobs. Is this the nature of full employment? But Kaleki's example about full employment under fascism strikingly clear that we cannot be concerned only with the absence of unemployment. We also need to know of the quality of the jobs people can obtain. So this quality growth, quality jobs has come up in the Kaleki's approach initially in the historical foundations that only quantum number of jobs is not important, but the quality is more important in this case. Moreover, full employment could just mean employing every potential in the country or everybody gets job. That is in economic sense. But full employment basically refers to a situation, according to Kaleki, where employers have hard time finding people to hire. That means this is done in a pessimistic manner that Kaleki wants to point out that it is basically making the people more challenging to get the right jobs. Because it's not that everybody is getting the jobs, rather if we look it from a different perspective, it is making difficult for the people to get into jobs if there is a full employment targeted of an economy. And this basically gets into the reasons which are being underlined, which makes the business leaders to reject the intervention of the government to ensure full employment. This is one of the most important, or these are one of the most important causes which make it very clear that why in a capitalistic nation attainment of full employment is not desirable or is highly challenging, and why the government initiatives will be rejected or will be discouraged. Three important reasons are being taken up from the perspective of Kaleki's approach. First, there has been a dislike of government interference in the problem of employment, because government interference will be discouraged. Secondly, the direction of the government spending, which had been reckless in most of the third world economies over time because of public investment and because of huge grant of subsidies. And thirdly, disliking of social and political changes resulting from the maintenance of full employment. Because any institutional change which will come up after full employment is being attained may not be desirable for the interest of the capitalist owners. So that means within a capitalistic society, these three reasons are put forward. Now we elaborate each of them separately, that why they are considered to be obstacles to attain full employment in a capitalistic society. The first point that comes in, the dislike or some kind of discouragement regarding the government interference. Because the capitalists discard the job creation policies, that in absence of such policies, output and employment fluctuate with business sentiment and private investment. Because what happens that the economy becomes more volatile, whenever there is a conducive investment climate, more job will be created, more investors would be coming up, but during the period of recession or any kind of depression, then they will be drying up. So this kind of volatility makes it very clear the instability in the economy. Secondly, the capitalists have a power which has an indirect control over government policy, and thereby everything which may shake the state of confidence must be carefully avoided because it causes an economic crisis. Because in a capitalistic society, the capitalists are basically powerful and they have a discretionary effect on the government's policy and decisions. So if it is left to the world of full employment, where the volatility is very much coming up, or where the instability comes up, then the motion or any kind of objectives of the capitalist will be at stake. And this will boil down their confidence and erode their confidence. Secondly, the most important view as one of the obstacles is the direction of the government spending. Because in most of the cases, the government goes on unnecessary spending or excessive spending, resulting to the erosion of the fiscal balance or fiscal indiscipline crops up. So opposing to the direction of government spending, Kaleki argues that capitalists are wary of public investment and subsidies of mass consumption. That means according to capitalists, this type of policy which is for all or which will make everybody better off cannot be taken up. So this is against their principle of capitalist owners versus the working class, according to the Marx philosophy. Moreover, the social and the political changes also comes in. So when we refer to the social changes, then the most fundamental argument is capitalist dislike of social and political changes brought about by ongoing full employment. Because they enjoy a dictatorship, they actually exercise power over the stakeholders. So any kind of change, any kind of revolution will be always discouraged by them. So full employment might go for a transformation of the society in terms of socio-economic parameters which will not be taken up by the business leaders or the capitalist classes. So these were the three major obstacles which make full employment not to come up in a bigger shape as has been conceived or conceptualized by Kalecki. So as far as the full employment objective has been opposed by the capitalist classes, some of the consequences were evident. The first consequence had been mass unemployment through austerity and high interest rates, because this has been come up with workers' protests and industrial disputes. High unemployment because of the wages are excessive, and so some kind of organized labor is being weakened, the unionization is being weakened. Wages are also being reduced, unemployment is still high. So most of the cases it is seen that economy is highly unstable because of these reflections, where the unemployment benefits are too generous relative to the wages, creating a disincentive to work. So any kind of disincentive to work comes up as a consequence of the opposition to full employment. Moreover, it is seen that the jobless benefits card but unemployment still high requires more eligibility requirements because the job surge becomes a notion. The entire process feeds on itself with a downward pressure on unemployment benefits because the capitalists enjoy the discretionary power, so any kind of subsidies will not be granted which will benefit the working class. So as a result of that, austerity comes in and high interest rate comes in. This basically goes into what had been the intersectional areas of Kalecki and the Marx views. Kalecki's argument stresses on the socio-political viewpoint, and that is being reinforced by the Marx. In a capitalistic society, workers are alienated, as it has been seen that alienation or deprivation comes up, and as a result they have very less power to do so, and workers continuously struggle for their payment. So Kalecki's approach took from Marx the idea of incompatibility, that capitalism and full employment cannot go hand in hand. As Kalecki rejected the vision of competitive capitalism with little excess capacity, he developed a model where wage would be increased by increasing aggregate demand and increasing profits. That means any kind of competitive capitalism will not come up. Capitalism will always continue to enjoy the monopoly power, but on the other hand, wage and aggregate demand will keep on the rise. This incompatibility is one of the most important fundamental finding of the class relationship, because as the class struggle comes up, the incompatibility becomes more and more visible and pronounced. Unemployment also comes up because capitalist classes asserts its control over the working class. They are not at all in a position to employ all, and thereby they have the exploitative practice and suppression of the poor. Without unemployment, the inherent contradictions would be continued to there, resulting to some kind of indiscipline and instability. And the institutional base of the economy would need to change, and full employment need to be sacrificed. So that was one of the most important intersectional finding of both Marx and Kalecki, that full employment needs to be foregone. As a result of that, institutional base can be reformed. So basically, when we go for the reassessment of the Kalecki's full employment, we say that Kalecki's affirmation that full employment adversely affects the profit represents the departure from the classical Marxist theoretical tradition. According to Kalecki's, profits may be economic rational, but may not be from the political standpoint. The argument that profits undergo a wage-induced decline, the economic upswing reinforces basic thesis that full employment is not generally in the interest of the business, because wages move downward and all kind of subsidies come up, and thereby full employment is absolutely against the vested interest of the capitalist owners or the business leaders. And so government will maintain full employment in a capitalist economy if it only knows how to do it fallacious. That means any kind of intervention of the government to ensure full employment will be always discouraged by the capitalist classes, according to Kalecki, because of the interest gets habited or the interest gets attacked. So in this particular module, firstly, the discussions on the political aspects of full employment are taken up, in terms of economic rationality, and then the political dimensions are put forward in terms of the constraints. Kalecki's approach says that capitalism and full employment are always incompatible because full employment can be manipulated by the Keynesian economics by changes in aggregate demand, but the political repercussions are always there, so maybe it is attained, but it may not be sustainable, and which is highly challenging. Thirdly, the Marx and Kalecki's view are more or less similar, but the radical departure is that Marx goes for profit maximization, but Kalecki's approach is a departure from the profit maximization in the sense that even if the full employment comes in, state must come up with institutional change. So a reassessment of Kalecki's approach is a balance between full employment and the objective of the capitalist owners in a capitalistic society, and thereby the origin of political dimensions of full employment can be explored.